Well, hey everybody, Pastor Steve here. Really grateful that you've joined me for today's devotion, whether you're listening to the podcast in your car or watching the video at home or at work. We're in Joshua chapter 9. I hope you've already read the chapter and perhaps written in a notebook or journal what the Lord said to you in these verses. This is the story of deceit, of failing to seek God's guidance in making decisions, and all the mess that comes because of that. As you know, the Hebrew people are they're in the Promised Land now under Joshua's leadership, and they are to drive out all the inhabitants because of their sin, and God's giving that land to the Jewish people. They've already destroyed the cities of Jericho and Ai. Before their next battle, people from one family group, if you will, who lived in 4 different cities, including Gibeon and 3 other cities that are mentioned in this chapter, and they're the Hivites, okay? So they're the Hivites who are really descendants of Noah. The Hivites are the descendants of Hivite, who was the great-grandson of Noah. And what happens is those Hivites who live in Gibeon and those 3 other cities trick Joshua and the Jewish leaders into an alliance because they lived in those cities there in the Promised Land, and Joshua and the Jews were to drive them out. What they did was, if you haven't read the story yet, they dressed in they sent some envoys to Joshua and the Hebrew leaders, and they dressed in old clothing, put on old sandals, and old sacks, worn out sacks on their donkeys that they carried their supplies in, old patched wine skins, and they got some older bread that was dry and had begun to crumble. And so in that disheveled look, these envoys showed up at Joshua, meeting with Joshua and the leaders of the Hebrew people, and said, we've come from a distant land. We heard how God delivered you all from Egypt and what He did to the kings who opposed you during your wandering in the wilderness as you made your way to the Promised Land. And so our leaders ask us to come to you and say to you, we want to support you. We want to be in partnership with you. We want to covenant with you. And the Jewish leaders, Gideon and the other, Joshua and the others, asked them, are you from the land that we're conquering? And they said, no, we promise you, we are from a distant country. We're not from here. And Joshua and the Hebrew leaders enter into a covenant to be partners with them. And then 3 days later, learned that these Hivites from Gibeon and the 3 other cities had lied to them, that they were actually inhabitants of the city. And Joshua and the others are upset, but they keep their word. They honor their word because they made a covenant. They gave their word they would not kill them. But Joshua did make them slaves. And actually, when you get to the book of Kings, some of the remnant of the Hivites, the people of Gibeon and so on, were still in Israel as slaves and actually helped build the temple during the days of Solomon. Now, what struck me in terms of God speaking to my heart was that through all of this, Joshua and the leaders of the Hebrew people forgot to seek God's guidance. When you look in chapter 9 of Joshua at verse 14, at the end of verse 14, it says, they did not ask for the counsel of the Lord. So before entering into this covenant with the Hivites, the people of Gibeon and the 3 other cities, they failed to take the time to pray. They failed to take time to seek God's guidance. What did God want them to do? What was God's plan? What was God's will? God's purpose. And as a result, they were deceived and made a bad decision. Whatever you're facing in life, always make time to seek God, to listen to God. Never allow yourself to be so busy or so rushed into making decisions that you don't have time to get in God's Word and reflect on the truth of God and the principles of God and how they apply to the decision you're making. That you don't allow time to enter into the presence of God through prayer and meditation and reflection. Always seek the counsel of God, because Satan is always going to have people and things and experiences in your life to deceive you, to trick you into doing something wrong. And that's why you need daily Bible reading, daily prayer. You need weekly worship. You need accountability with other believers. You need spiritual retreats, so that you can keep your thoughts clear. You need to always be seeking the counsel of God. If you just get busy living and doing, then Satan is going to send people into your life who will trick you into making bad decisions. So always seek God's counsel. And by the way, one interesting tidbit. These people of Gibeon and the 3 other cities, the Hivites, that tricked Joshua and the Israelis, it's interesting. Back in the book of Genesis, when you read that with us in our Bible reading plan earlier this year, you remember that Jacob's sons deceived the people of a particular village because the king's son in that village had slept with their sister and they wanted vengeance, but they negotiated a truce. And Jacob's sons said to the people of this village, if you will be circumcised and worship our God, then we will have a truce with you and we'll be one people. We'll partner together. And the people of that village agreed, and they circumcised all the men. And while the men were recuperating, Jacob's sons went into that village with a sword and killed all the men. In other words, Jacob's sons lied to and tricked the men of that village. The people of that village were among the descendants of Hivite. They were Hivites. And what's interesting then is that a little over 400 years later, the Hivites tricked the Jewish people, just like over 400 years earlier, Jacob's sons had tricked, lied to, and deceived the Hivites. The point is, you can't run from history. Sooner or later, it rears its ugly head. And you either deal with it the right way or it continues creating problems. Something to think about, isn't it? Hey, God bless you. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow.